Hello and welcome back, and that's right, today we're going to be talking about something that's been bobbing around the channel and indeed the world of Synology NAS for quite a while. We are looking at these three fully featured 4-bay disk station NASs from Synology, and I'm hopefully going to help you decide which one best suits your needs. However, we need to get a quick disclaimer off the bat. First and foremost, the top of my head's been sliced off, hasn't it? I'm going to try my best to make sure I get as much of these NASs on screen as possible, and it means that a lot of this video might end up with me looking a bit like this, so I apologise in advance if that happens throughout the course of this video. Also, this thing's between me and the mic, so I apologise if the sound's a bit muffled. But today we are talking first about the newest NAS on our list. This is the DS423 Plus, released in March 2023. We're going to talk about this, the DS923 Plus, released at the closing stages of 2022, I believe November, December time, depending on where you are in the world. And finally, we're going to talk about this. This is the Synology DS920 Plus, released in June, July 2020, and a NAS that has featured on this channel substantially over the last 2 to 3 years. Why am I comparing them? Because a lot of users that have been looking at Synology NAS, trying to get a nice compact 4-bay NAS solution, have been hearing these three model IDs thrown around a lot. And if you're new to the world of NAS, you're going to be thinking, well, they look the same. They look the same. They sound the same. It's the same damn solution. But why are they different prices? Why have they got their own strengths and weaknesses? Why can people saying one is better than the other? And that's today's video. So let's crack straight on with today's comparison. So first and foremost, while we're looking at these, we're going to talk about the old Wonga, aren't we? We're going to talk about the bunts. We're going to talk about the cost, and we're going to talk about which one's the best, price, but also value for money, because that's going to come down in the hardware. So straight away, I'll tell you right now, in terms of the three of them, as a bargain and looking for a bit of money for a particular reason, this one's the best price. This is the DS920, and right now Synology have discontinued this model. A lot of you watching this will go, well, why are you comparing a device that's discontinued? Well, for a couple of reasons. One, although it's officially discontinued by Synology, it's still available secondhand online a lot. It's been a very popular NAS, and on top of that, there are still some bits of stock at the time of recording floating around. None of the mainstream retailers, you might pick it up. The odd bit of stock might come from a third-party partner on Amazon selling some stock, but the majority of the places still selling the 920 are fairly kind of obscure e-tailers. It's out there, but it isn't exactly an abundant device in terms of stock out there. Now, next up is this one in terms of price. This one costs a little bit more, and I do mean a little, because the 423, although being the newest device, is actually a lower tier in the Synology portfolio overall. This knocks around for somewhere at that 440 to 460 mark. Again, factor in your currency, factor in your conversion rates, factor in your shipping and tax as well. And the 920 at launch was around 550 or 600 nicker, and that's a price that's come down over that time. So although it is a higher tier technically in Synology's portfolio, because of it being in the market longer and because of it being available and discontinued by the brand but still a bit of stock floating around, the price point is actually okay. Although in most places that people have got stock, they're actually starting to sell it now pre-populated only, so you have to buy the drives as well. Now, the middle one is probably the most enterprisey premium 4-bay of the three. It is the DS923, and this knocks around again between 550, 560, and actually closer to 650 in some places, because the hardware architecture inside is a big leap and a jump different from the other two on the table. More on that in a moment. So if the first thing you're caring about is the amount of money you're actually whacking down more than anything, cheapest, second cheapest, most expensive. There you go. Thanks for watching the end. But what about value? What about what you're getting for that money? Because it's not just about how much you pay, it's about what you're getting back, right? And in terms of the three of these, I would say in terms of value for money and what you're getting back, this one gives you the most. This one comes really close. Really close. If it was still being available to buy, it would probably win. But this gives you the most for your money. This gives you the second most, and arguably, at least until pricing gets a bit more fluid, the DS423 gives you the least of the three. How do I explain that? Well, let's work in reverse. This device is 4 bays of storage. It can't be expanded. It's got that quad-core Intel Celeron processor, the Intel J4125, a CPU originally released in 2019-2020. It's quad-core, 4-core, 4-thread. It's got integrated graphics on board there. So again, you have things like Plex transcoding, if you're going to be using it for virtual machines, Docker, surveillance and that. You've got some good kind of a good mixture of traditional CPU power and graphical service support inside as well. It's non-ECC memory with 2 gig of memory arriving on the default model that is soldered to the board, so you can't remove it, you can't swap it out, but there is an additional upgrade slot for a 4 gig Synology memory module there. So the max memory on this is 6 gig, which is a weird number, particularly when that CPU supports up to 8 gig officially, and you've kind of got this artificial cap, which is really annoying. Again, it cannot be expanded. You've only got those 4 bays of storage. All of these support Synology Hybrid RAID. They all support BTRFS. They all support all of the optional storage services that are rolling out in DSM 7.2. Things like Worm and volume encryption that's coming out there. And again, you've got all of the features and services of DSM 7, but we'll talk about that later on. But it's that lack of expandability, and the system arrives with ports and connections of 1 gigabit Ethernet and a couple of USB 3 ports. There's 2 1 GBE ports, but again, you can't upgrade those USB ports utilizing an adapter. You can't use a 2.5G adapter to USB. You can't use a 5G adapter for an upgrade. That is the sky limit. It is boom. 1 gig, and there's 2 ports there with port trunking, link aggregation, or multi-channel. So moving over to the 920, remember the 920 came out coming close to 3 years ago. It arrives with the same CPU as this one. This device that arrived in 2023, this 2020 box has got the same CPU, that J4125 CPU, quad-core integrated graphics, 4-thread, blah, 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 blah. It has non-ECC memory. So again, no error correcting code memory, but it arrives with 4 gig of memory by default. Soldered to the board, fine, but it's got that upgrade there. So the result is, this device gives you both 4 gig by default, twice the memory of that, and the option to upgrade it to 8 gig overall. Lovely stuff, right? So again, you're hitting that max cap. Is that the end of the road? No, because although it also only has 1 GBE ports there on the rear, it should be highlighted that the 1 GBE ports on this, although the sky's the limit on that, it does support an expansion. So you can add another 5 bays of storage. You've still got the limitation there of no USB adapters supported there for greater than gigabit connectivity. No means to upgrade with a PCIe, but at least you can upgrade the storage down the line there to add another expansion device. Now, that brings us to the one in the middle. Now, the one in the middle, when I talked earlier on about value for money, what did I mean by that? Well, the CPU inside is a different kind of processor, and there's definitely going to be some people watching this who are not going to think the hardware architecture in this is value for money, because it's a little bit more enterprisey and they don't see the use in it. They want a Celeron with integrated graphics, whereas this is a dual-core AMD embedded Ryzen, an R1600 processor, 2.6 gigahertz clock speed by default that can be burst up to 3.1 gigahertz. That's a big old jump over what's capable in the Celerons inside these. It's a 2-core, 4-thread processor, so you've got some virtual CPU behavior there to play around with. It also arrives with 4 gig of memory, but this 4 gig is ECC memory, error correcting code, where when data is being passed through the system, it does a checksum, a little bit of parity data as the data goes in and out of the memory, and then as it passes through, if there's any inconsistencies during the write operation, it repairs it and then sends it on its way. So again, you're avoiding long-term inconsistencies on kind of warm-ish and cold data down the line, where you don't want to come back to it a few years down the line and go, oh my god, it's all buggered. That 4 gig can be upgraded to 32 gig of memory. Yes, we are talking about upgrades and therefore not the base level model, but it's that scalability that's attractive there about the CPU memory combination. Yes, it doesn't have integrated graphics there, and for those looking for a decent Celeron with integrated graphics, whether it is for Plex, VM, surveillance, or whatever, you're going to be pleased about that. Maybe you want a 4-core because you're going to divide processors a bit more. But we can't say it's a bad CPU, and it definitely is a CPU that prioritizes file transmission and file consistency rather than a more balanced point there between graphical capabilities and performance. Also, it's a Gen 3 processor rather than a Gen 2 processor, which means that the lanes that are afforded to the system for all its different services, there's a little bit more bandwidth to play with. And what is one of the biggest examples of where that goes? biggest example goes in that not only has it got the 1 GBE ports and the expandability of this one, but it also has an option to upgrade its network connectivity. You, with this device, can add 10 GBE. You can add 10 times the performance of that default port as an upgrade. Yes, you got to pay. I think the current retail is about 150 to 160. The price is all over the shop due to hardware shortages and component shortages. But this does at least give you the option to scale up to 10 GBE in its lifetime. Something that's just off the table on these devices for good or for bad. Carrying on with value for money on these devices, and we carry on with that subject of storage, we got to talk about something else. And that is to do with the base of these products, because both of these all three of these solutions arrive with M2 NVMe SSD bays on the base. They've all got these two little slots here. What does that mean? Well, these allow you to install M2 NVMe SSD. So you've got your 4 hard drive bays there, but you can also add M2 NVMe's inside. Adding those can be used for caching. Read-write caching is when data is being written to the system. So in the case of write caching, you're writing data to the system, but it writes it to the SSDs and then internally moves it to the slower archival hard drive, thereby improving the response of data being sent to the system. In terms of read caching, more frequently access smaller data. Again, we're talking metadata, we're talking kind of compact data there that more is felt in latency and responsiveness than anything. That data is copied over to the M2 SSD. So it lives on the hard drives, but moving forward, when that data is required by connected users and services, the system will pull it from the faster SSDs rather than the hard drives. Yes, you have to buy the SSD separately, but caching can be beneficial, particularly in larger databases as well. But where things really change is in the 2023 generation of devices, allowing M2 NVMe's to be used as storage pools, effectively turning these 4-bay systems into 6-bay systems. The M2 NVMe's can either be used both in a RAID configuration as a storage pool for, again, faster acting databases, containers, VMs, lots of internal processes, all running specific Synology apps from the SSDs rather than the slower hard drives. Or you can use one as an SSD for storage pools and one for that read caching mentioned earlier on. Now, this all sounds great, right? These are all Synology, right? That's all great. We can use that. Wrong. Because right now, these two support M2 NVMe storage pools. This one doesn't. This older generation device does not support it. Now, a lot of users have mixed feelings about that because these two have got the same CPU. So why, even though they've got the same CPU, does this not support SSD storage pools and this one does? It reeks a little bit of an official choice there by the brand. And I think a lot of users that own existing DS920s have looked at using the third-party kind of GitHub updates, and we talked about one on the channel, that allow you to use M2 NVMe's in the 920 as storage pools unofficially. Now, again, by doing that, you're probably doing a good chance of knackering your warranty with the brand and your support long term because you're using it in a configuration and a means that the brand does not advertise. But a lot of users that own a 920 are starting to come out of their warranty period in some cases, and therefore they're less concerned about that. Yes, you're still getting a software warranty, which again, you potentially invalidate in one shape or form by using it in an unsupported configuration. But at the same time, I think some users that have had this for a while are prepared to give it a punt. But still, nonetheless, if you don't want to do that and you do plan on using the M2 NVMe's as a storage pool, these two are the ones for you. But just bear in mind that those M2 NVMe's, they're going to give you 1,000 megs each because that's the way the lanes have been designed, but not quite as straightforward as that. Those M2 NVMe's inside, that's going to be internal performance. It's only if you're using a device like this one that has a 10 GBE upgrade slot and therefore allowing you to have 1,000 megs external connection where you're going to be able to realize a lot of that performance externally. But I do think it's worth highlighting that although this device has got those Gen 2 has those M2 NVMe slots, they are Gen 2. These are Gen 3. What's the difference? Gen 2, generally in terms of traditional performance, and again we could talk about dual lane and stuff like that, but predominantly a Gen 2 slot gives you 500 megabytes per second performance, and that number afterwards, times 1, times 2, times 4, times 16 on a GPU or whatever, that just multiplies that number. So in here, if this is a Gen 2 times 2 slot, that's 1000 megs, and if it's a Gen 2 times 4 slot, and we will be digging in with PuTTY soon, that would give you 2000 megs. But we've already seen Synology several times cap the performance. Like in the 923, even though it's a 3 times 4 slot for the M2s, they've capped it and downgraded it to 3 times 1, meaning those M2 NVMe's give you 1000 megs each. But given this is Gen 2, it's a question of whether you're able to take advantage of Gen 2 times 2 or Gen 2 times 4, which we'll dig in PuTTY. And I do think, given that you can't really capitalize on the performance of those M2 NVMe's externally, M2 NVMe storage pools, when you look at all three of these, are just in a better position to be harnessed inside and out on the DS923 Plus rather than that of the 423 Plus, and certainly unofficially, which isn't going to be for everyone, via GitHub and those little, little changes you make in the back end there on the 920. Now, I think another important question a lot of users are going to have about these three devices is going to be about DSM. They all arrive with the same software, Synology Disk Station Manager, currently version 7.1 at the time of recording, but there is a version 7.2 currently in beta and almost certainly going to arrive in the next few months as a fully fledged release candidate and public availability. So all three of them run the same software. All three of them run the entire gamut of Synology applications. They can run everything. They've all got 2 camera licenses. They all support a huge number of IP cameras. They all 4 of them support a similar level of virtual machines thanks to that combination of cores and thread positioning. They both arrive with support of the Synology Collaboration Suite, Synology Drive, Synology Chat, Synology Mail, Synology Calendar. They all arrive with support of Active Backup Suite, a Virtual Machine Manager and Surveillance Station. They all arrive with a huge amount of support of Synology's applications and services within DSM and all of those client applications. But one thing I will add is you are going to get faster file transmission speeds in this, but you will get better multimedia handling on the whole on these. Now let me break that down. That first point, because of that CPU being far more efficient in terms of file transmission and speed, and being a Gen 3 system with those broader bandwidth lanes inside to be harnessed by the system, the result is that embedded AMD Ryzen processor there is just going to give you faster responses on traditional data storage services. Okay, what do I mean by traditional? I mean when you are measuring it in file speeds, less so about the handling of those files. Now, the handling of those files, if they're not too graphical, and you do still have access to quite a decent degree of system services, and that CPU does support 1080p and 4K multimedia as well, you're still going to have a great time. But if the media you're accessing, all your graphical services that you're utilizing require a lot of manipulation of graphics, be it in terms of encode, decode, in terms of conversions, in terms of running a VM that has a lot of graphical GUI activity there in the back end, or your widespread thumbnail generation and management and editing, an Intel CPU is probably going to do a better job overall because of that onboard integrated graphics. Now, I hasten to add, just because it's got integrated graphics doesn't mean it's going to be for everyone. A lot of users that are running standard media streaming in Plex, Jellfin, Emby, stuff like that, and also if you're going to be running cameras, you can have a great time on the 923 and you're not going to need those conversions. But there are users that fall into the following categories who may see benefit in integrated graphics. Number one, they're running cameras that default HEVC or H.265 streams, and if they either don't support H.264, which is normally quite weird, or it's inefficient management of the recorded feeds from the cameras running in to the NAS that are on H.264, forcing you into H.265. Why is that important? Because HEVC is widely available and supported and completely free to use, whereas H.264, HEVC or H.265 on the other hand is a kind of private license compression technique to make big files much smaller to manage and watch. And some media that's in HEVC format or H.265 requires on the client side transcoding and manipulation and conversion in order to be played. If you're enjoying your media from the comfort of your sofa and you're using a device that has HEVC support, has a client, that is like a Fire Stick or a phone or a console or a TV, has client-side conversion support, you don't need to worry because the client hardware can play it or will do the hard work. But if you're running a system like the PlayStation for your streaming, or Amazon Fire Stick, or some devices that do not have HEVC support, in that scenario, the NAS is going to have to reshape that file when you play it. And therefore, this CPU is not designed with that utility in mind. And when you're converting an HEVC file on all three of these devices, this will use substantially more power in order to get that done. Maybe you're not going to do it, and it's not a problem. But if you do think you're going to need those processes, go for something with integrated graphics like an Intel Celeron on these two devices. Another thing I will highlight when it comes to enjoying the media that's on your NAS, and again, this really is going more than anything out to multimedia users that are going to run media servers on these. If you're accessing the NAS remotely on like a mobile phone with a small screen, or a limited internet connection, or a wavering internet connection like you're on a train home or something like that on a commute, those are scenarios where you would want to reshape a file on the fly in order to watch it. Yes, you can transcode in advance. Of course you can do that, but not a lot of users want to transcode their entire digital library just in case they want it on the train home, and they rely on the fly transcoding, which is something that this device, for all of its bonuses and abilities, is just not as good at doing as these two devices released 3 years apart here. And in terms of DSM, although the DSM experience is going to be largely the same on here, although arguably you can do more active users, active processes, and more on this device, it has to be said for multimedia users, you're going to want to opt for these. All three have got 3 years of manufacturer's warranty. All three have got extended life cycle support of DSM from the brand themselves, well outside the hardware warranty on these devices. All three run very quietly. All three have got this great hardware design in their chassis that looks great on a desk. It looks great in a home lab. And if you're running a business environment and you don't have a server closet, these are going to look great on your desk. It's a good design chassis with loads of airflow on the sides, good active fans there on the rear that can even be swapped out for even quieter fans, and broadly the same hard drive compatibility there, though Synology on compatibility has been a bit all over the place. But this has been comparing the DS423 with the DS923 with the DS920. I hope you found this video helpful. We've covered a lot of ground. Hopefully there's an article below that goes into more detail too. Let me know if you've got any further questions in the comments below, and if you want to learn more or see more comparisons where we're going to look at a lot more of the value series, do check that out when it arrives. But thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Use the free advice section link below over on NAS Compares, and please use the links below to Amazon if 1, you found this video helpful, and 2, you were going to shop at Amazon anyway. I will leave a link to a few different e-shops that I found that, since this recording and even before this recording, that I've got the 920 still on sale, but bear in mind stock is super low, but I'll leave them down there anyway. And if you found the video helpful, and if you're going to shop at Amazon anyway, please use those links to go there. It costs you nothing extra, and if anything you buy when you get to Amazon via that link results in a kickback to me and Eddie. We're the only ones here at NAS Compares, and it allows us to keep doing what we do. It's a nice passive way that you can support content creators like us. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.